Hello everyone and welcome to Season 2 of Universe Mode. We are starting this season after WrestleMania with a brand new draft that we're going to be doing. In this part of the video we will be showing you all of the male superstars who are drafted to each brand, including the champions at present. So each brand will be getting 40 selections for their roster. This is not including the champions that are currently on the show, so I will take the time right now to show you the champions that we do have. Now, rebranded Monday Night Raw is now called WWE Japan, and that being said, we have our world champion, the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, Kazuchika Okada, in charge of leading the brand. He is the world champion. He successfully defended it at WrestleMania against Kenta, and now he will lead WWE Japan into new heights. Following that is the Triple Crown champion Tommaso Ciampa, another man who was successful at WrestleMania in his title defense against Tetsuya Naito. Next are the IWGP World Tag Team Champions, the Grizzled Young Veterans. They have been drafted from NXT to Monday Night Raw. When the champions were being selected, WWE Japan electing to pick up the Grizzled Young Veterans instead of the Raw Tag Team Champions at the time, who were Tyler Bate and Trent Seven. The Women's Champion for WWE Japan is Io Shirai, who is the former SmackDown Women's Champion, now having moved over to WWE Japan. And finally, the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion currently is Kishin Liger. So these are all the champions for WWE Japan. Now we will be moving on to NXT and taking a look at the champions over here. Sanada is the current NXT World Champion. Ilya Dragunov is the current NXT United Kingdom Champion. And as I mentioned earlier, Mustache Mountain not being selected to WWE Japan, rather picking up the Grizzled Young Veterans, and that means that Mustache Mountain are officially designated the NXT Tag Team Champions instead. Following that, Bull Nakano, still on her reign of vengeance, is still the NXT Women's Champion. And Drew Gulak, the only man to have held the NXT United States Champion, formerly the NXT North American Championship. However, Drew Gulak rebranding the title, and no one has been able to defeat him since. So there's no one who can stand in his way. Now let's move on to SmackDown and take a look at the champions over here. We have Drew McIntyre as the world champion, having come off of a successful defense against Prince Puma at WrestleMania. Next up we have Will Ospreay, the current Intercontinental Champion, another successful title defense at WrestleMania. He will continue to represent SmackDown with the Intercontinental Championship. Ember Moon, having moved over from Monday Night Raw, the former Raw WWE Women's Champion, now is going to be representing SmackDown for the women's roster. The SmackDown Tag Team Champions will continue to be the Undisputed Era on SmackDown on Friday nights. And finally, the Openweight Champion from Monday Night Raw, Kurt Angle, is moving over to Friday Night SmackDown. Now, the way that this will work is like this. First off, WWE Japan will get a pick. Following that, SmackDown will get a pick, and then finally NXT will get a pick. To begin the second round, NXT will get a pick, then SmackDown, and then finally back to WWE Japan. To begin the third round, WWE Japan will pick, and then back to SmackDown to NXT, and we will continue that pattern throughout the duration of the draft. Now, let's move over to the roster and take a look at who is getting drafted to which show. As I previously mentioned, 40 superstars will be selected from each brand, and the champions have already been drafted to their respective brands. So to begin this draft, WWE Japan will be selecting their first pick, that of which being the former Raw World Champion, Aleister Black. So Aleister Black making his home on WWE Japan, following a tremendous year in which he held the World Heavyweight Championship on numerous occasions, having wars with Pete Dunne, Brock Lesnar, and the current champion Kazuchika Okada all being included. Now, the second pick of the draft is going to SmackDown, and that will go to the one former NXT World Champion. He is Jay White, being selected to SmackDown, and a huge pick for them, considering the tremendous year that Jay White had in NXT. And a huge draft pick coming up now. And now, to conclude the first round of the draft, NXT will select Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan will be making his home on NXT, and you got to think that he's going to go right after Sonata's World Heavyweight Championship. Now, before I continue in this draft, I want to mention that there was one winner at WrestleMania who received a unique opportunity via the victory in the 5-man scramble match in the pre-show, and that would be Mr. Neville, Adrian Neville. And he has the distinct opportunity of not being affiliated in this draft, but rather his unique opportunity to be announced right now is that Adrian Neville, who I will go to so that we can take a look, will have the opportunity to select which show he will be on and which championship he would like to challenge for first. So via his victory at WrestleMania, Neville will not be a part of the draft. However, he will have the choice to go after any championship he wants. And now to follow this up, I will take the second pick for NXT because he is right next to Neville, and that would be Nigel McGuinness coming to NXT, and that is going to be a heavy-hitting contender for whatever championship he elects to challenge for, but you got to think he'd have his sights set on the United Kingdom Championship, following a tremendous year tag teaming with Darby Allin, and as an affiliate of Aleister Black, now seeing these two go separate ways on different shows, we will see how their careers pan out. But now the second pick for Friday Night SmackDown is going to be another former Raw World Champion, and that is Pete Dunne. Will be coming over to SmackDown now. After a tremendous year as well, in which he held the Triple Crown Championship for a record-setting amount of time, that of which being 385 days on his second run, not to mention his first run 30 days, and then also having a world title reign within this year in which Pete Dunne held the championship for 37 days following SummerSlam before he lost that championship back to Aleister Black. Regardless, a tremendous pick for Friday Night SmackDown, and now we move on to WWE Japan, and the following pick for Japan is a very appropriate, as it is Shinsuke Nakamura coming to WWE Japan and going to be looking to go after Kazuchika Okada, a man who he has had tremendous focus and attention for throughout this year. Shinsuke Nakamura also receiving a World Championship match back at Fastlane against Okada, so looking to right his wrong there. And now WWE Japan going to select another draft pick here, and their choice is going to be Karrion Kross coming to WWE Japan. A tremendous pickup and a tremendous talent from NXT that we saw break out throughout the course of the year, having a intense rivalry with Super Dragon in the beginning parts of this year, ever since the Dark Order made their presence known at the WWE Rumble back at NXT TakeOver. And now the next pick, a man who was in one of the main events of WrestleMania for SmackDown. Their pick is going to go to Hideo Itami. And Itami coming over to SmackDown now, going to look to continue the momentum that he had throughout the later stages of this year. The number 30 pick in the Royal Rumble, as well as being a victor at Survivor Series in a tremendous triple threat match, having so much momentum building into his main event match with Kazuchika Okada at WrestleMania, however, unsuccessful in that affair. Now we move on to NXT's next pick. And up here for the third round, we are going to see a huge, earth-shattering decision made by NXT to elect Randy Savage to NXT. And for the time being, I think we're going to take 92 Randy Savage to NXT. And this absolutely changes the foundation of NXT going forward, seeing as Randy Savage can pair off with Daniel Bryan, and we could see that dream matchup finally happening. Everyone is now eligible, I should mention, for this roster, so you will see everyone being picked, with the exception of a few talent that will not be selected, but we'll find out who that is at the end of the day. Now, the next pick for NXT is one of the longest reigning champions in Universe Mode over the past year, and that is Sami Callihan coming to NXT as well. And you got to think that he's going to make himself very comfortable in the NXT United States Championship scene very quickly here in NXT, considering his extended reign as the openweight champion throughout the past year. Speaking of championships, the fourth pick for SmackDown now is going to be Pentagon Jr., a former tag team champion, a former Royal Rumble winner as well. However, not being selected at the same time as Phoenix, and the two may perhaps be split up to separate shows in the coming year. However, Pentagon provided the opportunity to break out as a single star, as he did last year, winning the Royal Rumble. And now WWE Japan is going to select their fourth pick, and similarly to Macho Man Randy Savage, this is a tremendous decision on behalf of WWE Japan to select John Cena as part of their brand. And you got to think that after seeing Daniel Bryan and Macho Man Randy Savage, WWE Japan realizing the money and the potential in a program between John Cena and Kazuchika Okada, who is the current world champion. However, to kind of counteract this last pick, WWE Japan is going to select next for their brand Super Dragon. Super Dragon heading over to WWE Japan, and perhaps the rest of the Dark Order will be following in tow. The next pick for SmackDown now is a tremendous acquisition for SmackDown. It is perhaps the biggest talent yet to be seen here in Universe Mode at this point. However, SmackDown has selected Hiroshi Tanahashi in the 5th round of the Universe Mode draft, and this is a huge pick for SmackDown. You got to think that Hiroshi Tanahashi is going to be completely comfortable in the world title scene heading forward. Drew McIntyre perhaps going to have to look over his shoulder at the potential of Hiroshi Tanahashi coming after his championship. Next up, for NXT, they are looking to preserve some of their talent here by electing Jeff Cobb as the next pick for NXT, a rising star among NXT, a former Raw Tag Team Champion who has had a lot of difficulties throughout the last year and had to resort to returning to NXT, actually, returning to his roots and attempting to hone his craft, and he's going to look to do that here in NXT, considering the fact that he is the 5th round draft pick. They definitely see a lot of potential in him heading forward. Another man who has a lot of potential heading forward is the next pick for NXT. You see Sami Callihan, the former openweight champion, got picked earlier, and now we see Samoa Joe, another former openweight champion, being selected here to NXT. Up next, we head back to SmackDown, and this pick is going to be a tremendous pick that is going to break up a tremendous faction throughout Universe Mode, and that is going to be Evil heading to SmackDown and breaking off a factor of the Dark Order, seeing as Evil will now be a representative of a separate brand from Super Dragon. Now WWE Japan, for their next pick, is going to select a legend in this industry, and his name is Chris Jericho, heading over to WWE Japan and perhaps looking to bring the Inner Circle along with him. Next up for WWE Japan, we are going to see the selection of another WrestleMania main eventer who was unsuccessful in his attempt. However, Prince Puma coming to WWE Japan and perhaps going to look to take his claim to being the greatest IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion of all time. Take it up with Kishin Liger, perhaps. The next pick for SmackDown now is another former Raw World Champion, a man who we haven't seen in Universe Mode in a great many months, perhaps even years. At this point, I believe it's been 3 years since we've seen this man in Universe Mode. And for the next pick for SmackDown, they select Shawn Michaels. And actually, I'm not sure which Shawn Michaels to really go for here, because they're both quite excellent talent. We're going to go for the 2005 Shawn Michaels here, coming to Friday Night SmackDown. And considering Shawn Michaels and Hiroshi Tanahashi on the same brand, we could be seeing a dream matchup lining up for those two. Next up for NXT, they have picked such a tremendous lineup of talent so far, but their next pick is really one that's going to change the game. And that would be Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero now being an affiliate of NXT and a man who is being selected next. Very similar to Eddie Guerrero, a staple of the Latin American culture in the Lucha Libre world. And his name is Andrade Cien Almas, a man who feuded with Tetsuya Naito throughout the last year, struggling to gain a great deal of momentum heading into WrestleMania and struggling as a result. However, he is going to be drafted to NXT at a great place too, as the 8th pick. Now, SmackDown with their 8th pick would like to select the phenomenal AJ Styles to their roster. And since AJ coming to Friday Night SmackDown has really not achieved everything that he has wanted to over the past year, and he is going to look to right his wrongs this upcoming year as a part of SmackDown. Following that, WWE Japan is going to select another member of the roster who participated in WrestleMania. Unsuccessful in their attempt, however, Tetsuya Naito is going to continue wrestling for WWE Japan. Now, the next pick for WWE Japan is going to pad out the junior heavyweight division. A tremendous star in his own right and a former SmackDown Tag Champion, Rey Fenix, is now going to be on WWE Japan, and that is going to separate him from his brother as part of the Lucha Brothers, Pentagon and Phoenix, now on separate shows. However, going to look to create their own star power and momentum in their own right. Coming up next, we have another man who participated at WrestleMania. He was in a tag team throughout the duration of the last year and didn't find much success as part of the group. However, participated at Summerslam, and his name is Edge. Another man who will be coming to SmackDown. And another man who will be a tremendous addition to their roster. Up next, for NXT, we are only going to go down 2 places so we could get to El Generico, the next pick for NXT. An awesome pick that we're going to be seeing as part of their roster going forward. And just real quickly, I have to remove Kevin Owens as the manager. Kevin Owens has not yet been drafted, but perhaps he will be drafted similar to El Generico to NXT. Now, another one that we're not going to have to go far for is Eddie Kingston, the next pick for NXT as well. A man who competed back at Survivor Series, getting injured in the pre-show match against Kevin Owens, actually, ironically enough. Now he will continue on NXT to make his statement. Coming up next, we have a huge pick who made his debut at WrestleMania, and that would be The Fiend being selected for Friday Night SmackDown. The Fiend, a tremendous pick, and we're going to see what kind of mischief he gets into as an affiliate of the Blue brand. Perhaps going to make his sights set on the Intercontinental Championship currently being held by Will Ospreay. Coming up next for WWE Japan, they're going to select a man who has victories over the world champion last year, and that would be the Roman Reigns being selected to WWE Japan. And that's a tremendous pick for them as well, considering the debut of Tama Tonga back at NXT TakeOver over WrestleMania weekend, teaming with Jacob Fatu. You got to consider the allegiances that Roman Reigns could perhaps align with as a part of WWE Japan. Not only that, but also the Shield. Dean Ambrose competing at WrestleMania in that match with Will Ospreay, and Seth Rollins a potential pick for WWE Japan as well. However, for their next pick, they are picking another tag team wrestler who held the SmackDown Tag Team Championships over the past year, and his name is Cesaro, going to WWE Japan, and I would love to see him get in there with Kazuchika Okada at some point. Another tag team wrestler over the past year who has struggled to break out on his own, that is moving over to SmackDown now, is Shingo Takagi. And Shingo, finding himself on a separate show from Tetsuya Naito, could perhaps branch out on his own as a single star in the openweight division. Now the next pick for NXT is the first ever Triple Crown champion, a man who competed in tag team divisions against Cesaro and Sheamus last year, and he is Cassius Ohno, coming to NXT. The next pick for NXT is another legend similar to Macho Man Randy Savage that they're electing to pick up, perhaps to enact some dream matches with their current stars, and that would be Ricky the Dragon Steamboat coming to NXT. Now for the next pick for SmackDown, we are going to go to one of those affiliates of Roman Reigns that I mentioned earlier, that of which being Dean Ambrose returning to SmackDown, and perhaps going to look to prolong his feud with Will Ospreay until he gets the rightful championship that he thinks he deserves. The next pick for WWE Japan is going to continue to bolster the ranks of their junior heavyweight division by bringing along the legend Rey Mysterio to their brand. A man who competed for the Cruiserweight Championship over the course of the past year, but unsuccessful in doing so. Perhaps going to line up for a championship match with Keishan Liger, a match that I'm sure everyone would love to see. Next up, for WWE Japan, we have Kevin Owens coming to their show. And that is going to split up the separation of El Generico and Kevin Owens that we know has existed in the past. However, Sami Zayn still an eligible contender to be drafted here. Next up for SmackDown, they're going to elect to pick a man who competed in the open weight ladder match at WrestleMania this year, and that was John Morrison coming to SmackDown. Following Morrison, we have a pick for NXT, and this is going to be the former Cruiserweight Champion and the former Mr. Money in the Bank from last year, that of which being Amazing Red, moving to NXT and going to look to cement himself as a staple of the NXT roster. And now considering the people on the NXT roster being Amazing Red, Cassius Ohno, El Generico, Eddie Kingston, Samoa Joe, Daniel Bryan, Sami Callihan, all staples of the American Independents. You got to think that this roster is going to be untouchable throughout the coming year. We're going to see some incredible matchups, one of which perhaps could contain this man, a tag team star who is now becoming a single star perhaps as a part of the NXT brand, and that is Carl Anderson being selected to NXT, the Machine Gun, finally getting an opportunity on his own in NXT. Now the next pick for SmackDown is going to be King Booker. However, he is not going to just be the king. He is going to be the original five-time WCW champion. Booker T will be selected to Friday Night SmackDown. The next pick for WWE Japan following Kevin Owens is another great legendary Canadian, that of which being the Hitman, Bret Hart. As I mentioned earlier, anyone is capable of being drafted here to any of the shows. And the next draft for WWE Japan is a tremendous pick that's going to continue the allegiance that we saw between Nigel McGuinness, Aleister Black, and finally this man, the former tag team champion who held the Raw Tag Team Champions with Nigel McGuinness, that of which being Darby Allin, returning to WWE, well, formerly WWE Raw, now WWE Japan, and going to look to follow his allegiance, his teachings from Aleister Black. And perhaps that will bring him great success and yield him more potential opportunities in the future. The next pick for SmackDown, a former his tag team partner has already been selected in this draft. However, Randy Orton has now been selected as part of SmackDown. The next two picks actually, I should mention, for NXT are a tag team, that of which being Zachary Wentz and Desmond Xavier, the Rascals, both being selected by NXT, and that is the first consecutive tag team that we've seen picked up by any roster. So the two of them, the Rascals, Desmond Xavier and Zachary Wentz, currently known as MSK in the actual NXT, are being selected to NXT in Universe mode. Following the selection of Randy Orton, SmackDown is going to look to continue their traditional roots in the wrestling world by selecting Ric Flair, a tremendous acquisition for SmackDown. And now Ric Flair will be an affiliate, most likely, of Randy Orton on that show. Following that, WWE Japan is going to select a former SmackDown World Champion, that of which being Finn Balor. And furthering the separation of the club now, as Finn Balor on WWE Japan, AJ Styles, a member of SmackDown, and Carl Anderson, a member of NXT. The next pick for WWE Japan, following their selection of Finn Balor, is going to be Sami Zayn. And Sami Zayn now could align himself with Kevin Owens in WWE Japan, and they could yield themselves some tag team championship success as a result. The next pick for SmackDown is going to be Seth Rollins. Following that selection, NXT is going to select... NXT will be selecting a star that they have had throughout the past year who has tried to break through to the North American Championship scene. However, unsuccessful in his attempts against Drew Gulak, and that's Cameron Grimes, returning to NXT and going straight to the moon. Following the selection of Cameron Grimes, NXT is going to select a former Raw Tag Team Champion, may he rest in peace. Luke Harper has been selected to NXT, And let's see, should we do... I think I'm going to do the traditional Luke Harper 14 rather than the Bludgeon Brothers to go to NXT. And of course, rest in peace to Brody Lee, John Huber. Moving forward, the next draft pick for SmackDown is going to be a legend, as many of the SmackDown draft picks have been so far. And that is going to be Roddy Piper, making his presence known on SmackDown. And perhaps going to look to go after his first ever world championship in the WWE. Now the next pick for WWE Japan is going to be the Bulgarian Brute Rusev. Rusev having a tremendous presence in the NXT scene throughout the past year. Similar to the next draft pick for WWE Japan, that's going to be Taiji Ishimori, another man who has had tremendous influence over the NXT scene throughout the past year. Just real quickly, I'm going to set these. I just know if I leave them, I'm not going to come back and do it later. Okay. Taiji Ishimori now selected for WWE Japan. The next pick for SmackDown is going to be I'm trying to look for it here. Where is it? There he is, Ravishing Rick Rude. He is going to be selected for SmackDown following Roddy Piper. Rick Rude now another selection for SmackDown. And now the next pick for NXT, looking to secure their talent, Jacob Fatu, a man who competed at TakeOver over the past week, is going to be continuing his stay at NXT. Coming up next, we have a new addition to the NXT roster, a man who competed at the Royal Rumble for NXT, however hasn't made his presence known quite yet, and that is Mike Bailey, who will be present throughout the NXT roster as of now and could be a huge contender for that North American title scene. Following that, SmackDown is going to select a huge acquisition, a huge prospect for them, and that is Bandito returning to SmackDown. He has been competing for SmackDown ever since his debut in the Royal Rumble, before that being an affiliate of NXT. And now the 20th pick for WWE Japan. This will conclude the first half of the draft before we take a brief intermission. And the last pick for the first half of the draft, the 20th pick for WWE Japan, is going to be Tama Tonga. As we mentioned earlier, Roman Reigns being selected as well as part of WWE Japan. And we can see that relationship between Tama Tonga and Roman Reigns perhaps blossoming into a potential tag team championship reign. We're going to take a brief intermission just to catch our breath after those 20 draft picks, and we'll come back with the next 20 draft picks very briefly. Following the selection of Tama Tonga in the 20th round of WWE Japan, having selected Tama Tonga in the draft, their next draft pick, the 21st pick now for the draft, is going to be Mark Haskins. Now the next pick for SmackDown is going to be a contender that they are going to retain throughout this year, a man who had the opportunity to challenge Drew McIntyre, and that's Johnny Gargano, the former tag team partner, I should mention, of Drew McIntyre, in which they were Evolve, who held those tag team championships. Yet Gargano unsuccessful, going to look to continue his attempt to turn his friend back to the side of hope and desire. Coming up next for NXT, they're going to be selecting a former tag team champion on SmackDown, his name being Sheamus. And Sheamus could be an interesting contender for the United Kingdom Championship scene. And similar to that, another potential contender for that division is going to be Jordan Devlin coming to NXT. Up next, we're going to see SmackDown select a friend of Bandito's and a potential tag team partner, that being Flamita. Up next for WWE Japan, they're going to select a combination tag team for their next two picks, that of which being the Revival, Dash Wilder and Scott Dawson. So both of the Revival being selected by WWE Japan for the next two picks. The next pick for SmackDown is going to be another potential tag team contender. Along with his friend John Morrison, The Miz will be returning to SmackDown. Up next, another potential tag team contender, this time being a friend of Cameron Grimes, actually, and that of which being Andrew Everett, making his presence known in NXT. And this is going to be the first time we have seen Andrew Everett in Universe mode. However, a man of great potential and a man that we could see match up with this next draft pick for NXT in a tremendous matchup, that would be Jeff Hardy, making his first ever presence known on the NXT roster. Following that pick, SmackDown is going to select, up next, Isaiah Swerve Scott. And Scott could be a likely Intercontinental Champion within the next year if he gets the opportunity to go up against Will Ospreay in the coming months. Up next for WWE Japan, unfortunately for Adam Cole, he's going to have to say goodbye to one of his members of the Undisputed Era, that of which being Roderick Strong, who is going to be debuting for WWE Japan. And following after the Junior Heavyweight Championship, of course, a former Cruiserweight Champion being Roderick Strong. And another potential Cruiserweight contender here, Hiromu Takahashi, being selected to WWE Japan, a brand in which Tetsuya Naito still retaining his value on WWE Japan, and perhaps Hiromu could look to line himself up with Los Ingobernables de Japón to yield greater success. Now another pick for SmackDown is going to be Sammy Guevara, making his appearance on SmackDown. A man with endless potential, Le Spanish God. And the next pick, gonna further break down the dissension of the Undisputed Era here, as finally the last member of the Undisputed Era, Bobby Fish, being selected to NXT. Unfortunately, that will break up the entirety of the Undisputed Era, except for the team of Future Shock, being Kyle O'Reilly and Adam Cole, who are the current SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Up next for NXT, they're going to select Cara Noir for their NXT United Kingdom Championship division. A tremendous pick considering the fact that he has victories in the past over Ilya Dragunov. Not in Universe mode, however. Just a factor I thought I should mention. Now the 26th pick for SmackDown is going to be the man known as Bob Lashley. Following Bobby Lashley, the next pick for WWE Japan is going to be the man of the hour, Lio Rush. A man who I really wish was still wrestling for WWE. Following that, WWE Japan gonna select another member of the New Japan roster, that being El Desperado. The next pick for SmackDown is going to be one of the former television champions on SmackDown, that being Braun Strowman. Up next, making his first appearance in Universe Mode yet again, NXT bringing in some of the hottest talent and hottest prospects from around the world. They are going to be selecting Hijo del Vikingo for their roster. And to follow up that selection, they're going to be selecting another man who is making his first ever appearance within Universe Mode, and that is going to be one half of the tag team, being Santana, selected for NXT, one half of the tag team LAX, or EYFBO. Following the selection of Braun Strowman, SmackDown is going to select a tag team contender, and this is where things are going to start to get hairy, as tag teams are going to be broken up and sent to different shows, as Kofi Kingston being selected for SmackDown. The next pick for WWE Japan, and this is a former cruiserweight champion, so you got to think that he was going to be returning to the junior heavyweight division, and that is Drago. Following Drago, WWE Japan is going to follow up that draft pick with another tag team contender, and that is Stu Grayson, another member of the Dark Order, joining WWE Japan and aligning himself with Super Dragon. Now Evil Uno, the only member of the group yet to be drafted. We will see if one of the other brands is able to acquire him in the meantime. However, for the time being, it is not going to be SmackDown, because they have selected to pick up Big E following their selection of Kofi Kingston. Following their selection of Santana, NXT would like to pick up Ortiz as well. Fortunate to not have Ortiz go within the last round. However, they are going to take advantage of the tag team disadvantage in being drafted in this year, and going to select Xavier Woods also to NXT, breaking up the New Day. However, Big E and Kofi Kingston going to continue to be on SmackDown. After a devastating loss on that draft pick, SmackDown is going to select another hot prospect, a man we haven't seen yet in Universe Mode, and that is Matt Taven coming to SmackDown. Following the selection of Matt Taven, WWE Japan is going to follow up with Evil Uno to complete the Dark Order on their show. And along with Evil Uno, WWE Japan will also select Buddy Murphy. The next selection for SmackDown, the 31st round of the draft, is going to be EC3 heading to SmackDown along with his manager Drake Maverick. And the next pick for NXT is going to be El Hijo del Generico, a man who has slid under the radar so far, but he will be joining his father, El Generico, on NXT, perhaps going to look to tag up with his father. The next pick for NXT is going to be another man who we haven't seen in NXT yet, as you see the trend for NXT selecting new stars that they can build up, and that's going to be Brian Pillman Jr. Following that, SmackDown is going to select a man who can potentially team up with Bobby Lashley, a man that they picked earlier as part of the Hurt Business, as Cedric Alexander joins their brand. Up next, for WWE Japan, they're going to select yet another tag team. This one being Hansen and Rowe of War Machine. And Hansen also being selected for the second pick from WWE Japan of that round. Following that selection, SmackDown is going to select Luke Gallows to return to SmackDown, perhaps in some capacity to assist AJ Styles. Up next, we're going to see NXT select another superstar who we have not seen in Universe Mode, and they are continuing that trend to make huge stars out of everyone that they deem has potential, and that is Taurus making his debut as a member of NXT, and he is going to be a very hot prospect for that show. Following the selection of Taurus, we are also going to see a new acquisition, that of which being John Silver making his debut in NXT. Now the 34th pick for SmackDown is going to be complete the Hurt Business, as Shelton Benjamin will also be joining Cedric Alexander and Bobby Lashley on SmackDown. The next pick for WWE Japan is going to be a man who is deserving of another attempt, I believe, at the Junior Heavyweight Championship, and perhaps he will get that now that he is on WWE Japan, and that will be the man known as Mustafa Ali. Following that selection, they are also going to pick another Junior Heavyweight contender, that being The Blade, making his presence known in WWE Japan. The next pick for SmackDown, and they're going to have a bit of difficulty securing these two next picks. It's going to be Jey Uso will be the first pick for SmackDown. You got to think that they're going to be completing the tag team of the Usos, assuming that NXT does not take Jimmy within the next two picks. However, that will not be the selection, as they have elected to pick up Aussie Open, who will be returning to the NXT scene. Former tag team champions in NXT, Mark Davis. Also potential United Kingdom championship contenders. And now SmackDown successfully going to pick up Jimmy Uso. As for the next pick for WWE Japan, they're going to select a Japanese talent himself, that being Akira Tozawa. Now the next pick for WWE Japan is going to complete a tag team. A man that they selected earlier as a high-profile draft pick, Jim Neidhart, is going to be accompanying Bret Hart on WWE Japan. Now, as for the next pick for SmackDown, you're going to see another tag team successfully completed, as the Kingdom will be returning, as Mike Kanellis can team up with Matt Taven on SmackDown. Now for the 37th pick for NXT, they're going to select Matt Travis, a star who made his name known throughout NXT over the past year, and is going to continue to do so throughout the next year as he's been drafted to NXT. Oney Lorcan, another selection, going to be selected for NXT. Now heading back to SmackDown, they're going to select for their next draft pick Bobby Roode, if I could find him. Bobby Roode, the man who competed at WrestleMania in that 5-man scramble match that I mentioned earlier. The next pick for WWE Japan is going to be a man who previously competed in New Japan, and that is Grand Metalik. A great deal of cruiserweight and junior contenders lining up for WWE Japan, and that is just going to continue to bolster their division. However, the farthest thing from a cruiserweight, Killian Dane, is the next pick heading over to WWE Japan. The next pick for SmackDown is going to be Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy competing with Jeff Hardy to try and capture those tag team championships a lot throughout the past 2 years, but unsuccessful in doing so ever since Money in the Bank. And now the final 2 draft picks for NXT. One is going to be Fabian Eichner, a potential United Kingdom champion. And the 40th and final draft pick for NXT, it is Papa Shango. So Papa Shango will conclude the NXT roster. Now as for SmackDown's final pick, SmackDown has elected to select, similar to Papa Shango, another legend. This one being Ted DiBiase. He will bring the revenue straight to SmackDown. And we gotta wonder who Ted DiBiase will be investing his time and money in. And the final pick for WWE Japan to conclude the draft for the men's side is going to be Sting. And with that, all 40 men have been selected from each brand. And we now have, if I can take a look at the shows here, we now have a combination of something's not right here, but regardless, I think because of the champions, it's off just a little bit, and because I had to add a few extra people to WWE Japan in order to retain the pay-per-views. So I'll remove Cole Quinn and El Mago now. But please stay tuned for the next part of the draft, in which we are going to be doing the women's side of the roster, in which every woman's talent will be drafted. And for the women, we are going to be selecting 15 per brand. And then following the women's selections, we are also going to be doing the remaining talent in tag teams. And then there will be 7 rounds of tag team drafts, leaving us with about, I'd say, approximately a little bit less than 80 people per brand. So please stay tuned for next time. We will be doing the women's side as well as the remaining tag teams across all brands for the draft. But thank you for joining me for the Universe Mode draft, and we will see you next time. Take it easy, everyone. Thanks.